Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So this is the first installation after Ramadan with regard to the class Healthy Relationships. And in this chapter, chapter 8, we're going to be dealing with the topic of identifying what isn't right in a relationship. Now, I wanted to be very upfront. This chapter is a very difficult chapter for people that are going through struggles in their relationships. I have to warn you that this could trigger you to begin to have a certain emotions, or it can trigger you to begin to think certain things. So we have to be very careful here. The issue that we confront in relationships when they're troubled or struggling is that many times we don't know how to address the situations that we're confronting in the relationship, and we don't know how to work with our own emotions. And those are two different things. Our own, what we're going through on our own, and then what's happening in the relationship, even though they may be interrelated, they're two different things, and we have to be conscious of that. And I mentioned that because Rachel Chapman, one of the first things that she starts off with is this idea of the gut feeling. She says that sometimes in a relationship, we can't seem to disregard the thought that something isn't right. And I would say it's not just the thought, I would say also the feeling, right? And I think more so that's what she is speaking on. It's not just thinking, it's not just ideas, but it's feelings. And so I tried to frame out a way of dealing with the topic, the idea of having a gut feeling or sensing something is wrong. And then there's a behavior that supports that sense that something is wrong in the relationship. And that behavior is coming from the other spouse. You know, that behavior is coming from the other spouse. And so then we begin to think about things, right? So there's this sense that something is wrong. There's this intuition, this gut feeling, and then there's behaviors that we see in the relationship, and we begin to think about what it is that we sense and what it is that's taking place. I identified the idea that there's shifts that take place in emotion, in language, in the way that the person acts towards us, right? And so those are the areas that we also need to work on in order to build the relationship. What kind of emotion do we share with our partner? What kind of language do we share with our partner, and how it is that we act towards our partner? So when there's deficiencies in those areas, or one of those areas, or majority of those areas, or all of those areas, emotion, language, action, then we're going to have trouble. There's no doubt about that. The thing that bothered me a little bit is that she went from sensing something is wrong in the relationship to our partner not being interested in the relationship to looking at the problem of infidelity. And I felt that although she is bringing up a good topic, I felt as though that this chapter was underdeveloped. I felt that this chapter was underdeveloped. And so one of the things that we confront is that we may sense that something is wrong in the relationship, but we may not necessarily be at the level that the relationship is one in which our partner is completely disengaged. Or we may not be at the level wherein our partner is cheating on us, so to speak. And those are the two areas that she's dealing with. So I'm trying to be careful not to just stay stuck on those extremes. So her model is beneficial in the sense that she's saying that if we have a sense that something is wrong or a gut feeling, then there's some behaviors that may support that gut feeling, then it's going to lead to us thinking a certain way about the relationship. That we can use when we start talking about, is there something going on in the relationship? It's not just a matter of gut feeling, and I've talked this over with people that are involved in therapy, and I've seen people, I'm talking about therapists, and I've seen some conversations within the counseling realm amongst professionals that they also call us to be careful with the idea of gut feeling. Why? Because sometimes our intuition and our gut feeling, when we go through trauma or when we've been through bad situations, sometimes our gut feeling and our intuition will lead us to self-sabotage. It will lead us to a position where we're already waiting for the worst to happen, and the only thing that we're really doing is we're dooming ourselves. And what it is that we feel may not necessarily be something that we can deny, but how it is that we understand what we feel. Because remember, there's that issue of having a sense that something is wrong. Then there's the issue of behaviors that we may see in the relationship. And then there's how we think about those behaviors and what is the relationship between those behaviors and the gut feeling. Remember that we want to keep that model in mind. Well, our thinking may be not necessarily a correct understanding of the behavior, and it may just be a justification that we're having a sense of something being wrong, and we are used to things being wrong, or we're not used to being in a situation where we can trust people. Now, the more complicated issue is when the relationship has been hurt. When the relationship has been hurt, or when there's things that have happened in the relationship, or let's use her example, when the partner has completely disengaged, is not interested, she calls it loss of interest, or when there's infidelity, meaning when there's cheating. Those are extreme issues. Those are extreme situations, and I'm not saying that they don't exist, but not every sense of something being wrong in a relationship means that my partner is disengaged or that my partner is cheating on me. That's what I didn't like about the way that she constructed this chapter, but that doesn't mean that she is not onto something. She's onto something, and that is this idea that what happens when we get a sense that something is wrong in the relationship. How do we deal with that? The idea of that there's some behaviors that we can identify to see if what we sense is something that we should pay attention to or not. That's a good framework. The other thing is that it's not just the issue about behaviors that are coming from our partner that we are looking at as a proof to kind of support what it is that we feel, but also our thinking, right? And that's why I say that when she says sometimes in a relationship we can't seem to disregard the thought that something isn't right. It's not just the issue of thought, is also the sense, right? Is also the sense, and she kind of makes up for that when she says we don't know how to exactly point out the change in the relationship, but just know our gut tells us so. I'm comfortable with what it is that she's saying, but I don't think that it's beneficial for us in understanding what a healthy relationship is, or it should be like, or what is a model for a healthy relationship. I don't think it's beneficial for us to deny, or I shouldn't say deny, I should say disregard the importance of thinking about the relationship between feeling and thinking. We have to make sure that we're looking at both, how it is that we can feel something and it can influence our thinking, and how it is that we can think something, and how it is that that thought or those series of thought, or how it is that that thinking can impact the way that we feel. I hope that that's clear. That as human beings, we feel things and we think things, and there's a relationship at times between feeling and thinking. Our feeling can influence our thinking, and our thinking can influence our feelings. Some people are at different levels of sensitivity when it comes to the issue of feeling. I want to pause there for a minute, and I want to go back to what I said. Some of us, if we grow up in trusting environments, we may have a sense that something is wrong, but we're more in control of the filter process. The filter process is that we can begin to identify, well, maybe our thinking is wrong, or maybe our feeling is wrong, or we can pause for a moment and say, hold on a second, like, let me review what it is that I'm thinking or feeling. Let me pause for a second. We don't want to immediately jump to a conclusion, or we don't immediately react, in other words. Some of us, we're tied into, when we sense something is wrong, then the whole world collapses, because we're used to people letting us down, or we have been hurt to such an extent that it's hard for us to break out of that feeling of things in life just being bad. That's why I want to be careful with this issue of sensing something's wrong in a relationship, because sometimes there may be something wrong in the relationship, but we also bring a feeling to that situation where we compound the problem, where we make it more of an issue, and we start to impact our partner's behavior. This is a topic which in reality is a book in itself. In reality, it's a study in itself. It's a little beyond us, but I just want to put that framework in place. We sense something is wrong. We see certain behaviors in language and the way that, that the person is acting toward us as well, and in emotion. Then we begin to have certain thoughts. Okay, so we have to be conscious in all of those stages. I sense something is wrong. I see certain behaviors. I experience certain behaviors. Then I'm thinking about what's going on. Those are three realities that we have to be very conscious of when we talk about identifying when something's not right. A person could be having health issues and the behavior changes. A person could be struggling at work and the behavior changes. That's why communication is important. And that's why, when we start talking about the issue of love languages, and I want to come back to that because she touches upon that indirectly, but doesn't develop it enough as far as I'm concerned. When we start talking about love languages, although it's not a set rule, right, that a person just uses one type of love language. And love languages means that the way that it is that we express love. Some people, they are very sensitive to communication and words. Some people are very sensitive to how it is that another person is there for them to support them. Another person may be focused on how much attention do they get. Another person is focused on, is the person giving me gifts or giving me things, and another person may be focused on the issue of physical affection, right? And so the love languages is a subject in and of itself, but all of those things need to be in place in order to make the relationship work. But one person may lean towards one or two of those, or a couple, or three of those types of ways of communicating love. One person may express one way more than the other. But when there's a deficiency in those things, we're seeing a deficiency in emotion, we're seeing a deficiency in language, we're seeing a deficiency in action, in other words. So what I want to say is that the love languages, the general 5 ways of identifying different types of love languages that people, they express love through words, they express love through acts of service, through attention, quality time, giving gifts, physical affection or touch. I want to say that those things can be looked at through the lens of emotion, language, and action. And so when shifts begin to take place in what kind of emotions are being exchanged, when shifts begin to take place in how it is that we're speaking to each other, the frequency and the quality, meaning how much we're speaking to each other and the quality of the conversation that we have, how we connect at those levels, and the way that we act towards each other, when shift takes place in those areas, there's something wrong in the relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean, as she's saying, that there's a loss of interest. There just may be a struggle that's in the relationship that needs to be identified, right? That needs to be identified. But let's go to where she's at, and then we'll unpack this, and maybe we'll take a little bit of time on this because it is a dense chapter in this regard. One of the things that she says is that we don't know how to exactly pinpoint that some change has taken place. And I said this issue, that I brought this issue up already, that a change, we have this sense that something's wrong, a change may have taken place in emotion, language, action, or all of those, or some of those, so on and so forth. We don't know how to pinpoint what's going on. We may have some ideas, we may have a gut feeling. And I already mentioned that there's that concept of a sense something is wrong, there's behaviors, and then there's the way that we think about it, right? And so there's the issue of our sense, and that can tie in emotion, how we feel about the situation. I get this feeling, or I get this sense that something's up. That has I don't want to complicate it more, but I want to say that we also have to be careful to separate what we sense and true feeling, right? Those two things are important to separate out. But for right now, let's keep it simple. There's a sense of something wrong. There's behaviors that we see. There's ways we think about that. Okay. We may identify a problem in the emotional area, a problem in the language area, the way we're being communicated to, the problem in the action area, how we're being treated, and so on and so forth. So then now she begins to talk about that our partner is disinterested, right? That's the area that she is focusing on. So she says the person seems distant, they seem disinterested, they seem unconcerned, right? Disconnected. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're totally out of the relationship. That's what I was trying to mention before, that we need to make space for understanding that something may be wrong in the relationship, but that doesn't mean that our partner is completely disengaged. She jumps immediately to talk about, well, our partner's disinterested, and then she moves forward to say, well, if they're disinterested at this level, and she talks about what level, then that means that there may be infidelity. And so then she goes out to map out some signs for cheating. And before she does that, she maps out some signs for disinterestedness. I want to add that there may be something wrong in the relationship, but it may not be those extremes. And I've been hitting on that over and over again. But she's using this example, so I want to flow with it at the moment, the disinterested example. And we can, let's say, between us and our reflection here in this class, that there's levels of disinterestedness. It doesn't mean total disengagement. I already mentioned that. There may be disinterest or distance, or there may be disconnectedness for a specific reason, right? And so it could be anything from being tired to being stressed to being sick to being worried to a whole bunch of mad, whatever it may be. Doesn't necessarily mean that that person completely disengaged. I keep emphasizing that. But here she's saying that it's important to think or reflect upon what is the behavior like. And so she's taking us to the process of concluding that our partner is disinterested. So she said, first, we think that perhaps the work has gotten to them, and that it is why they are not interested in anything concerning you. But as more time passes, you realize that it isn't about showing less interest in you, right? They aren't as devoted to your kids or family. Either they forget important dates, come back later than usual, say that they even have eaten with friends, and go to sleep right away. In other words, that's disengagement, right? And that's what she talks about, disinterestedness, right? That's a disengagement. But those behaviors in which there's a disconnect at the level of emotion, at the level of language, at the level of action, can be an indication to something being wrong, right? And so basically, what we're seeing here is she's taking us through that thought process that I sense something is wrong. I see certain behaviors. Now I'm thinking about what it is that I'm seeing. So that has to do with disengaging the relationship. Now she says they rarely compliment you, right? They don't notice you, right? They don't notice how you look, and they used to notice. So then now we're talking about the issue of attention being removed. So the person is acting in a way where they're not really in the relationship with you, in other words, right? And again, this is the example of a person being disengaged, right? And we were trying to say that some of that behavior may be there, but that doesn't mean that they're totally disengaged. Something may be going on that may be pulling them away. So we need to be able to identify that there's levels to this. So then she goes on further to talk about thinking, what's going on in our minds. The more this continues, the more boggled your mind becomes. 100 different things are going on in your head. And I like this part about the book, that she is walking with us through this process. We sense something is wrong. We see some behaviors. We think about it. We're trying to eliminate, what may not be the case. We're trying to identify what may be the case in terms of what's happening in the relationship. And then we're at a point of confusion. Now, one of the things that happens here that's the problem is that in this scenario that she built up, there's no communication. There's no saying, hey, honey, hey, babe, hey, habibi, whatever it may be that you call your spouse. Let's sit down and talk. I noticed that you've been tired. I noticed. And in other words, she is identifying an extreme. It's that point at which the communication has broken down there, because there's no way that all of these behaviors and this type of communication pattern is going to take place, and this way of exchanging emotion is going to be a reality. And you don't know what's going on unless there was a breakdown in communication before, unless this has been going on for a while. In other words, once it gets to this point where the person is showing disengagement on multiple levels, participation, emotion, communication, once it gets to this level, that means that there was a neglect to identify the situation earlier on. So in reality, that's why I want to talk about that issue of identify what isn't right, or getting a sense that something isn't right. We need to have that concept earlier on, not when things go south, or not when things go completely out the door, or not that we let that behavior continue to develop and continue to embed itself in the relationship, and we left it without addressing it. That means that there's an obvious disconnect, right? And so when there's shifts in emotion, language, action in the relationship earlier on, we have to be engaged with each other so that we are somewhat aligned. We may not be aligned 100%, but we should not be guessing as to what's going on in the relationship. That's a problem. Because that means now that trust, confidence, reliance on our partner, all of that is out the door. And so for sure, that is going to be a cause of breaking down the relationship. That means that there was not an exchange of affection. That means that there's not an exchange of physical intimacy. That means that there's not an exchange of investment in the relationship, materially or otherwise. You know what I'm saying? At a level that will maintain the relationship. I hope that that's clear. What I'm saying is this, that if we get to this point where the person is disengaged and they lost interest and we don't know why, that means that this has been going on for a while and we neglected that. And that goes against everything that we've learned before about learning how to be attentive and listening, learning how to share affection, learning how to invest in the relationship, learning how to find the magic in the relationship, learning how to be connected with our partner. That means all of that doesn't exist if we get to this point. And so when we have deficiencies in emotional exchange and the way we speak to each other and the way that we treat each other, of course, the relationship is going to have issues, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it is an issue which will throw us out of the relationship, but it's an issue which may injure the relationship. And all issues are not at the same level, people. Just because we may have a fight or just because we may have a bad day or a bad week or even a bad month doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is out the door. There's a number of reasons, especially in today's time with so many different pressures that will cause people to have different emotions, to disengage and so on and so forth. So we have to be careful. That's why I was saying that the way that we filter what's going on in a relationship as being the way that we filter the concept of the sense of what's not right, we have to be careful, right, not to create problems with that. And some of us, we have trauma, so we're already going to be on alert. So she gets to that point where now is at a point where they're thinking we've done the process of elimination, and now we're in the extreme point. And the extreme point is that it's not a work issue, it's not a sick issue, it's not an issue that we can identify is something else that's more of a problem. And so now she says 100 different things going through your head. Are they cheating on me? Have they found someone else? Do they find me attractive? Have they fallen out of love? And then she says, okay, before you go mad with all of that thinking, look to see if these signs are apparent. And these are the signs of a person being disinterested. Right. So she wants you to have this filter of what a person that is disinterested may look like. They're always busy, right? It's all about their priorities, right? And there's no exceptions, right? You're like a second option. You're taken for granted. They don't talk much. The communication is not existent. She goes to the point of saying it means they couldn't care less about your feelings. I wouldn't say that. You understand what I'm saying? I would say that we have to determine what's going on. We have to be careful. She's going to the extreme, right? She's saying there's a sign, if they're always busy, it's a sign that they've lost interest. It could be that they're under pressure at work. You understand what I'm saying? But they don't know how to express that, or the relationship was already having its issues, and it's not necessarily about you. They want to be there for you, but they have so many issues going on, right? And that's why I said the communication piece has to be in place so that we have an accurate vision of what's going on. But she is saying if they're always busy and you're not a priority, that's a sign of disinterest. If the communication is broken to the point where there's not much communication, that's a sign of disinterest. If they're showing that they don't care about your feelings, that they keep blaming you on a constant basis, right? Name calling you, it's a sign that they're trying to disinterest themselves from you, but it's not always the case, right? It could be the case that the person is hurt and doesn't know how to work through that issue. That's why we have to be careful, you know, and how we're using what it is that she's saying. They keep pointing out their flaws, right? A while ago, they were praising you for little things, right? And then now it just becomes a situation where it's nasty, right? They, you know, and so she says here, they're not finding your personality interesting. They've changed, you know. It says, but sadly, her writing says, but sadly for the worse, you no longer smile like you used to, feel agitated most of the time, are confused and lost in your thoughts. You know, I'm sorry, that they change you. They change you, she says. You've changed. You're not included in decision making and planning. You know, that's the reality, that you're basically marginalized. If something is done that may be offensive toward you, or they let you down, or they fail to fulfill a commitment, they don't apologize. There's an excuse for everything. Apart from apologies, they're making excuses for themselves. They won't come with you to the party or family gathering. They won't complete their part of their chores. And even when you try to initiate intimacy, they make an excuse. They no longer care about your well-being. Again, she's at the extreme level, right? But the opposite of these things are what a healthy relationship looks like. Let me hit the other three and then we'll go back. They forget things like your birthday or important dates. They tend to overlook what's important to you. They can't really listen to what it is that you're saying. You know, they treat others better than you. And then now that's where she goes, that they have or are cheating on you, right? And that she's talking about how this interest, now it goes into this issue of cheating. Cheating is a short tell sign that confirms that this interest, they have fallen in love with someone else or having an affair, which is why you no longer appeal to them as a prospective candidate for a partner. So healthy relationship is that the person is making time with you. Healthy relationship is that the person has you as a priority. The healthy relationship is that the person communicates with you. Healthy relationship is that there's responsibility. A person is not necessarily blaming you, that there's no name calling, there's no abuse in language, right? That the person is looking for an excuse for you, that a person is communicating with you and trying to figure out what it is that happened, what it is that's going on, that a person is not fixated on your flaws, but looking at your strengths, right? And uplifting that a person is not changing you, that you haven't changed in the relationship, that you find yourself in that relationship. You're not lost to yourself. You know, you're stable within yourself. You have the ability to feel, you have the ability to exchange, you have the ability to have your own thoughts. And you also feel that that person loves you and you love them, but you're not lost to yourself. You didn't lose yourself. You're included, you know, and what the person is doing. They involve you. They let you know about their day. You make decisions together. The person takes responsibility for their behavior. If they were late, if they didn't leave a text, if they didn't call, if they didn't do what they said that they were supposed to do, there's not much excuse making, right? Your welfare, your well-being is their priority. You know what I'm saying? Is mutual in that regard, right? That's healthy. Yeah, they're conscious of what's going on as far as important things, you know, as far as they remember, right? And they treat you well. You know, they treat you well. And when I'm saying treat you well in a healthy way, right? Right. They're not, you know, for instance, she gives the example of going to the grocery store, but the person that's frustrated because they have to do it, or they, you know, no, that, you know, there's a sense of cheerfulness and so on and so forth. And of course, there's fidelity. You know, the person is loyal to you. She goes through 14 signs that the partner has committed infidelity. I don't want to go into that as of yet. I want to leave that to the next class, but I do want to take some points from this. That a healthy relationship is one in which your partner is reliable. A healthy relationship is when there's an exchange of physical intimacy. A healthy relationship is where you trust your partner and they're reliable and you have a sense of what's going on. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean you have to keep tabs on them every 5 minutes, but you have a sense of what's going on. Healthy relationship is where you can call each other to account, and it doesn't necessarily have to turn into a conflict, or there's a healthy exchange of emotion. Healthy relationship is where people are taking care of themselves for each other and for themselves. right? That's important. A healthy relationship is where a person can be questioned and so on and so forth. A healthy relationship is where there's there's that sense of trust when it comes to telephones and when it comes to sleeping. It's not an issue where what is he doing? What is she doing? That type of concept. A healthy relationship is where there's consistency. You know what I'm saying? And where stories are there, or there's trust enough to understand where there may be a breakdown in communication. That the sense of suspicion is decreased. A healthy relationship is where there's attention exchange. Right? Healthy relationship is where the communication flows. Right? Healthy relationship is in which there's investment in the relationship economically. Right? A healthy relationship is wherein that person, you understand why there's changes in behavior. Because she's using this idea of infidelity being notable when the person starts to do things that they hated before, and now they do those things that they hated. And so I don't want to fixate on that right now. So what we said is that a healthy relationship is where we're putting in emotionally in the way that we communicate and the way that we treat each other. That's important. That's key. And so sometimes when there's breakdowns in relationship, we have to, and right now I don't want to get into the whole issue of, infidelity, because one of the things that she brings up, and we'll talk about that before, is that infidelity or cheating doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship is done, that you can get over infidelity, and that is workable for some people. You understand what I'm saying? But as an imam, I'm not going to say that a person has to stay in a relationship in which there's infidelity. That's a person's choice. But also, we're not going to say that if a person chooses to stay in that relationship that they're dumb or that they're wrong. That's something that has to be decided upon. But we're not going to obligate people to stay in relationships in which there's breakdown. You understand what I'm saying? People have to be willing to work on their situations, and they have to be willing to take adult. They have to be willing to take adult decisions. That's important. But I want to go back to this point of when there's issues that are taking place in the relationship, and it's not necessarily to the extreme of complete disengagement or infidelity. It may be an issue where there's this breakdown. The power of forgiveness is important, right? As well as learning how to maintain and restore trust in the relationship. And that comes when we're honest with each other and we're able to share each other, we're able to share pain with each other, and where we're taking responsibility versus laying blame, or when we're able to identify where it is that we should take responsibility, right? When this constant laying blame and share, there's no sharing of blame, that we can't sit down and say, well, you know what, I was wrong on this. I apologize, and that apology is noted in word and action. When we're just blaming each other and that's it, and I didn't do this, or I'm justified, if that's the orientation, it is going to be very difficult to overcome that type of situation, right? So that's why the power of forgiveness is important, and the power of forgiveness has to come with change in our behavior, the way that we speak to each other and we talk, and that's, of course, going to come with some time in situations where there's issues. But we're not talking about those extremes of when the relationship, there's disengagement completely, or where there's cheating. That needs another discussion on the power of forgiveness, which she brings up. One of the things that I will say in her favor is that she's bringing up how to deal with relationships and in situations which the relationships have been heavily compromised. Those are conversations that usually are not had in the general mainstream Muslim community. People suffer in those situations alone. So we'll come back to what it is that she was saying and try to rework it. But we want to stay at the lower level when we sense something is wrong. It's not to the extreme level of complete disengagement. It's not to the extreme level of infidelity. How do we work through that? We have to learn how to forgive, and we have to learn that forgiveness, comes, and apologies and so on and so forth. That comes with us changing our behavior as well. You understand what I'm saying? That comes with us bringing about a change within ourselves and how it is that we deal in the relationship. That helps to restore trust, and that's when we begin to have more and more honesty, right? And so when we've done something wrong in the relationship, like for instance, when we're not emotionally putting into the relationship the way that we should, we have to learn that we're failing our partner, right? Or the way that we're communicating is not the way that it should be. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have to say I'm sorry, but it should be the case that we're showing that we're sorry. It should be the case that we're showing that we realize we are failing our partner emotionally, in language and action. When there's a deficiency in intimacy, when there's a deficiency in communication, when there's a deficiency in the way that we are not showing appreciation and word to our partner, we have to realize that's a failure in the relationship. So if we want forgiveness from our partner in that regard, then we have to show some sort of change in the relationship. And that means that communication has to always be flowing in order for us to realize where it is that we are doing well, where it is we need to build, right? And so that communication, before we get to the point of blaming, you know what I'm saying, before we get to the point of judging, we have to understand that what it is that our ground rules or expectations in the relationship are, that we would like communication to be like this. We want this type of language. We want this type of emotional exchange. We want this type of action to be invested in the relationship. That's how we should be clear on that from each other from the beginning. That's why I've mentioned many classes ago that many of us don't know how to build relationships. Many of us don't know how to do marriage. We don't know what to expect at the level of emotion, at the level of language, at the level of action as a couple. We may have individual expectations, but as a couple, we don't. And a lot of times, because we don't have shared understanding on how to deal emotionally, how to communicate, how to act towards each other, we end up not aligning. So we have to be able to have a clear model of what we're operating, where we want to operate from. And then we have to be able to understand that we fall short. And so how it is that we exchange apology and forgiveness, how it is that we give forgiveness or ask for forgiveness, is by looking at what's going on in emotion, looking at what's going on in action, looking at what's going on in language, how we're dealing with each other at those levels, and self-correcting. Relationships need a constant investment. There's no doubt about that. The relationships need a constant investment. And that is what maintains trust, and that is what helps trust to be at a healthy level. That consistency that we have with each other at the level of emotion, at the level of language, at the level of the way that we treat each other in action is something which is predictable, something which is reliable. So when changes take place in that, then we get a sense that something is wrong in the relationship, and that's where we communicate. What's going on? I've been sensing you haven't been yourself. Is there something you want to share? Do you need time? That's what we need to learn, how to communicate with each other so that we're able to determine the health of the relationship. But there's no doubt that relationships are like gardening. Gardening is a forever process. It's a process of cleaning, it's a process of maintenance, it's a process of fertilization, it's a process of patience. Relationships need constant investment. When there's serious breakdown emotionally, or in the way we communicate, or in the way that we treat each other, then we're going to those extremes of disengagement and maybe possibly even infidelity. But the ground rules should be clear when a couple is establishing itself of where it is that we want to be emotionally, where it is that we want to be in language, where we want to be in action. That should be a constant process, right? And so in that process, we need to learn how to work it so we can make our relationships interesting. We can bring fun into them. We can bring seriousness into them, commitment, loyalty, all of those good traits and qualities. It's not easy, people, because many of us have lost the ability to communicate, or we've never developed it. We don't know how to work through our feelings. We don't know how to use words of appreciation, and we don't know how to speak to each other in healthy ways. Many of us don't know how to communicate emotion properly. We haven't seen it. We haven't tried it, or we tried it somewhat and we were hurt, and now we don't trust the way that we treat each other. Many of us don't know what to model in the relationship. That's why learning how to behave, how to exchange emotion, how to communicate is key. Before we go to these extremes of complete disengagement from the relationship, complete breakdown, or even the problem of infidelity, we need to realize that when we have a sense of something being wrong, that we have to make sure that there's a support for that sense of something being wrong. If we're going to go by that, there has to be behavior to justify that, and our thinking has to be supported, and we should be communicating, right? We shouldn't let this stuff linger to the point where the relationship just collapses, right? And so with that, we end. This is probably one of the more difficult chapters to deal with, because a lot of relationships are in these types of problems in emotion, problems in communication, problems in the way that people are being treated. Some people are suffering complete disengagement. Other people are going through the problem of infidelity. And so there's that breakdown that's in place. We want to pause here and return back next week. If there's any questions, just you can send them to us by way of YouTube or on the Facebook page. You can contact the masjid directly, and we could deal with the issue, you know what I'm saying, that you may be confronting. So with that, we end. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.